Hello everyone, thank you so much for clicking on today's video and welcome to my channel. In today's story, OP finds herself in a really weird situation where she wants to tell her best friend and cousin the truth about the real world, but the cousin is in an extremely emotional state and refuses to hear her. So then she reaches out to Reddit and asks if she's the a-hole for what she did. It's a little ambiguous, but the story is very interesting and I do hope that you enjoy it. If you do, please leave a thumbs up. And before I move on to the story, I just wanted to take a second and thank all of my subscribers. Thank you so much, you guys are amazing. For those of you that don't know, I have a personal goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers. So if you like my content and would like to support me, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button. Anyways, thank you so much for your time and on to the story. Am I the a-hole for raining on my cousin's parade regarding the name she picked out for her baby? My cousin Stephanie and I are really more friends than relatives. An important note is that she's not really online much, so can be out of loop on certain memes and jokes in internet culture. And to be honest, doesn't really understand the concept of viral internet references or how they work. Stephanie is pregnant and just found out that it's going to be a girl. About a week ago, she told a gathering of her best friends that she's going to name her daughter Karen. The room instantly went cold, but after an awkward silence, everyone else politely said that it was lovely. I couldn't bring myself to respond at all. Later in the evening, when Stephanie was out of the room, everyone was immediately like, "Oh my god, that poor child," and "Why would she pick Karen of all names?" I was uncomfortable with this conversation, given that everyone had been so positive about the name to her face. I thought about it over the next couple of days, and just felt really weird about the whole thing. The name is really loaded, to the point that it could be detrimental to the baby, and Stephanie had no idea of the connotations to make an informed decision. So, a couple of days later, I tentatively brought it up. I told her I was so excited for the baby and just wanted her to have all the available information when picking a name. I then started to explain that Karen has some negative connotations and has become sort of an internet joke to describe a specific kind of entitled middle-aged woman. Stephanie instantly was furious and started talking over me, saying, "Why are you saying this? That is so mean." I was really surprised by her reaction. It felt very out of character, so I immediately stopped and said, "I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I just wanted to tell you something I thought you might not know." She replied, "That's the name that I picked for my daughter and you think I picked it as some kind of joke? I don't understand why you'd say something so hurtful." When she said that, I felt like it signaled that she didn't really understand what I was trying to tell her. So after agonizing for a second about whether to press the issue even though she was so angry, I felt like in for a penny, in for a pound. And since she was already mad, I wanted her to at least understand what I was trying to explain to her. I searched for Karen Know Your Memes on my phone and started to show her the screen of the results while saying, "Look, I'm just saying that there's more meaning to the name than you may realize." She stood up, pushed my phone away and shouted, "Wow," then stormed out of my home and drove away. My aunt and mom have been berating me all week because Stephanie told them that I made fun of her baby name. Stephanie has not spoken to me or responded to my text since. I can take a hint and I'm not going to broach a topic again that caused so much distress, but I keep going back and forth on whether I was the a-hole here by bringing it up in the first place. So in the original post, Opie got a lot of "you're the a-hole" comments, and that was the overwhelming judgment. They then went to edit the post and added, "Thank you everyone. I've been properly schooled and I accept my judgment that I was the a-hole here. Stephanie and I have a history of being extremely open and honest with each other. I was the maid of honor in her wedding, which we planned on being the case from a young age. And we always joked as teenagers that part of my duties would include talking her out of a marriage if the groom she picked sucked. So maybe I was too flippant with approaching this topic due to our history, and was unempathetic in understanding how much she was already invested in the name she chose for her future daughter. I admit I'm a bit frustrated that Stephanie still doesn't understand what I was trying to tell her. She still thinks that I was making some kind of weird, cruel joke accusing her of picking the name as a joke. But I've messaged her a sincere apology that she accepted, and I will never speak of this again, to Stephanie or baby Karen. I'll also stand up for Stephanie if her other friends talk bad about the name around me again. If they're not willing to voice their thoughts to Stephanie directly, they need to not say the kinds of things they were saying behind her back. Opie then also added, "One more thing, I definitely was not trying to tell Stephanie to not name her daughter Karen. I just wanted her to make the decision either way, knowing the connotations, since I'd want someone to do the same for me if I'd picked a baby name with cultural baggage I wasn't aware of. I realize now that I handled it poorly and was hurtful to Stephanie in the process, but I just wanted to be clear that I wasn't actively trying to talk her out of the name. I just didn't want her to be blindsided if it came up later." There was also some additional context in OP's comments. They say, Stephanie and her husband have a deal on baby names where she picks girl baby names and he picks boy baby names, and they have unlimited veto power for the other person's choice. He's on board with Karen as far as I know. We're all the same age, late 20s, but neither of them spend time online or is even particularly tech savvy. My post last summer wasn't the most exciting or dramatic on Am I the A-hole, but I wanted to provide an update if anyone was interested. Baby Karen was born healthy and happy back in October. She's an absolute sweetheart of a baby and I'm totally in love with her. Between March and May, I didn't get to see her at all in person, but I was doing regular FaceTime house party calls with Stephanie and Karen, and over the last few weeks, I've been going over to Stephanie's house to sit in her backyard and chat with Stephanie and coo at baby Karen from a lengthy distance. I have 2 reasons for updating. First, I've realized that since Karen's birth, that her name has taken on a new meaning to me. When I'm with her, Karen just means her, and I don't think about the other connotations. In other words, you guys were right. That said though, my second reason for updating is that Stephanie got back into her years unused Facebook at the beginning of the pandemic to keep in touch with people. She's been on it pretty regularly lately for the first time in years. Historically, she has not really been much into social media. Most people in our area social circles have been posting really heavily about Black Lives Matter and the protests happening right now, as well as racial justice issues more generally. As a result, Stephanie has now come into contact with the deluge of Karen memes for the first time, and found them confusing and horrifying, especially the use of Karen as shorthand for racist. I've basically just declined to talk about it with Stephanie because it went so poorly last time, but both my mother and mother-in-law hounded me about it because it's upsetting to Stephanie, and said things like, "Is this what you were talking about before? Why didn't you say so? Why didn't you explain it better? You should have told Stephanie." And Jesus wept. You really can't win with these people. Thanks again for all your feedback on my last post. It was very helpful in giving me some zen about the situation. Opie then went on to edit the original post and added, "Wow, I've been super overwhelmed by the flood of very kind, heartful private messages, and just 1 or 2 not so kind ones, as well as the comments on my other post. Thank you everyone. It continues to amaze me how many nice and empathetic people frequent a sub devoted to a-holes." They also added some additional context in the comments. In response to someone criticizing Stephanie, they say, "To be fair, Stephanie has been cool about it. First, she saw a bunch of posts about the Central Park Karen, when that white lady was harassing that black bird watcher in the park, and came to me asking me to explain why everyone was calling the woman Karen when her name was Amy. Since she's gotten back on Facebook, she often asked me to be like her internet culture interpreter. I immediately told her, sorry, I'm not having a conversation with you about this because we had a major conflict over it last year, and I'm not getting into it with you. I think that was the first time that she started to understand what I'd been trying to tell her last year, and in fairness to her, she didn't bring it up with me again after that. As for my mom and aunt, they're kind of generally ridiculous. They tend to be extremely reactive to whatever is going on precisely at that moment, And if someone in the family is upset, they get over-involved trying to quote-unquote fix it. Stephanie has been venting to her mom about this, not me, just how upsetting the memes are. And she and my mom have just been doing their normal thing of blowing it out of proportion, and now making it my fault somehow. I love my mom and aunt dearly, but they're not to be reasoned with. In response to another criticism of Stephanie, OP says, "Honestly, with my mom and aunt, it's easier to just wait for them to move on to the next shiny thing. I don't blame Stephanie at all. She's just upset and confused, but hasn't made it my problem at all. My aunt and mom just have a flair for the dramatics." In response to someone saying that they still thought OP was the a-hole because they only brought up the concerns of the name for selfish reasons, OP says, "I probably wasn't clear about this in my original post, and I think it's probably because that's the part I cut down when I went way over the word limit on that first post. But when I described feeling weird and uncomfortable over the couple of days I took to ruminate after Stephanie's announcement, the weirdness and discomfort was mostly a response of what happened with our friends group, rather than just my own feelings about the name. I felt super uncomfortable being in the room while our friends talked horribly about Stephanie's name choices after praising it to her face. I didn't have the presence of mind in the moment to call them out before the moment was past, and I sat with the guilt for a couple of days. I didn't want to tell Stephanie what they said because it would be very tattletale-y of me, and I also didn't want to cause conflict with the friends group or upset Stephanie. So raising the topic on my own seemed like a good compromise at the time. I did wrestle internally with how to handle it, and clearly I missed the mark. In response to a comment that said, "Do you understand that there's a massive difference in being upset with your friend for their response and approaching Stephanie because you say that you want her to be fully informed of her name choices? These are two different things that you're conflating." And OP responded, "No, to be clear, I didn't raise the conversation with Stephanie in lieu of scolding our friends. I brought it up because I thought they owed it to her to raise those points in front of her face if they were going to say them at all. Ultimately, I thought Stephanie was owed the knowledge of those connotations, whatever she chose to do with that knowledge. Also, I don't know how to explain the context of our relationship, but Stephanie and I have a lifetime of shared radical honesty with one another, from the inconsequential, for example, telling each other when outfits were unflattering, to the difficult, when she gave me a come to Jesus talk years ago about how someone I considered a close friend was very horrible to me, and that I should end the friendship. Based on our extreme closeness and shared history, this conversation felt like the right move at that time, even though it ultimately backfired. Hi all, I've gotten a few private messages over the last couple of years asking for updates, and since we celebrated Karen's 3rd birthday, I wanted to circle back to anyone following the story. First of all, baby Karen, who's not so much of a baby anymore, is doing amazingly on her developmental milestones. She's a very bright child, sharp as the sharpest tack and extremely tuned to her environment. Some of what she says is already fully incomplete sentences, which just makes me want to cry when I hear it, because it seems like Stephanie was giving birth just yesterday. Karen loves books already and will intentionally study the pictures in them for huge stretches of time and claim to be quote-unquote reading. And you would not believe the uncomfortably incisive questions that she's asking. I'm fully convinced that this child is going to be an actual genius. Regarding the name, unfortunately, when Karen started daycare earlier this year, she started getting grief for her name pretty quickly from older kids. The daycare she attends mixed the ages together at a couple of different points throughout the day, and while there fortunately wasn't much direct bullying, 2 of the age 5s must have heard and internalized the derogatory connotations of the name Karen at home. As a result, they found her name absolutely hysterical, and they kind of spread the idea to the other kids that there was something funny or wrong about her name. Karen was too little to understand what was happening, but found the other kids' behavior towards her generally upsetting. The daycare staff made every effort to shut it down and let Stephanie and her husband know right away. After about a month of this, where the daycare wasn't having much success putting the kibosh on this behavior, and the kids weren't dropping it, Stephanie and her husband made the decision that Karen would go by Carrie from now on. which was already an established nickname that a lot of friends and family were already using, and that Karen already recognized as referring to herself. Stephanie and I never really fully revisited what happened during her pregnancy, but when she was telling me about what was happening in daycare, she apologized to me. I immediately felt terrible and reassured her that there was no reason to apologize. Emotions were complicated when you're pregnant, and I thought that having Karen go by Carrie was a great solution. Though changing what you're used to calling someone is effing hard, I've found, and I'm still directly addressing her on manual mode every single time. A lot of the responses I got to my last post were gleeful and leaned into the schadenfreude of the situation, and I have to say those responses really bummed me out. I would much rather live in a world where I was wrong about the impact Karen's name would have on her. I cannot emphasize enough what a sweet dispositioned, smart, curious, loving little girl Carrie is, and how much she deserves every single thing in life. Also, a lot of people didn't like Stephanie in my last post, but I need you to understand that this is a tiny snapshot of a very emotionally high-strung time in her life, and overall, Stephanie is a wonderful lifelong friend. She has gotten me through so many personal crises over the years, and she will never fail to show up for the person she really cares about. Being pregnant and having a strong emotional attachment to the name you've picked out for your daughter is completely understandable, and her pregnancy was pretty rough on her moods. She once wept uncontrollably at a cat food commercial when she was about 7 months pregnant. I also think that my approach for trying to explain the name issue those years ago was very clumsy, and I could have done a much better job of bringing it up. That being said, with the distance of time, I'm really glad that I did broach the topic. I feel like I owed Stephanie that information, and I can feel good about giving it to her. If I'd chosen not to bring it up at the time, I think I'd have a lot of regrets now. The only thing I'd change now, looking back, is that I would try to bring it up more gently somehow with Stephanie, so that I could have had the chance to explain. In summary, all is well. We've run into a little bump on the road with other kids' reactions to Carrie's name, but in some ways, it's better to get this out of the way now, when Carrie doesn't really understand what's happening, than have this happen in kindergarten or elementary school down the road, when full-on bullying could be a risk. She's adjusting really well to going by her nickname full-time, and Stephanie and her husband are planning on enrolling her with Carrie as her preferred name in all future schooling. And since schools around here go by their preferred name rather than legal name in things such as classroom roll calls, it's possible that she can get through K-12 without it ever really being widely known amongst her peers that her legal name is Karen. And I really hope that this common usage of the name dies down in the next few years. So guys, what did you think about this? I'm actually a little confused, particularly about the response that OP got to her original post. If I was in Stephanie's shoes, I would 100% want to know whether the name Karen was associated with some sort of negative connotations, and I just cannot understand why the overwhelming response from Reddit was "you're the a-hole." I think the top comment kind of sums it up. They said, "Karen is just a meme and will be gone soon." That was 3 years ago and it's just exploded. I don't know, I feel like the internet really missed a mark on this one. And also, can we just talk about the mother and the aunt? Like what? Their response is one of the most stupidest responses I've ever seen, and it's completely utterly unhelpful. When OP is trying to help, instead of trying to get the full gist of the situation behind Stephanie's back, they just attack OP, and then when things finally start coming to light, they then blame OP for not explaining enough. That is, oh my god, I find people like that so effing frustrating. Like, you are not helping in any way. What is wrong with you? Anyways, I really dislike people like that. Please let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. Would you have wanted to know? What would you have done if you were in OP's shoes? I'm really interested in knowing what you think about the situation. Anyways, thank you so much for your time. And if you enjoyed the story, please leave a thumbs up. And please subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories from Reddit with updates.